Yunus Osman, and I am a second year medical student at UBED Kairuki Memorial University. I'm also the chairperson and the co founder of Legion's organization that focuses on helping out humanitarian and environmental needs across Dar es Salaam. And I spend a lot of my time working alongside youth initiatives like Rotaract, TAMSA, NIA, both inside and out of university. And somehow, between leaderships, meetings, schedules, responsibilities, deadlines, I still really enjoy life. I love, 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 love going to the beach. I love disappearing for coffee and somehow returning 3 hours later. Sorry, mom. I love random adventures. I love long conversations with my friends. I love moments that were never planned, but somehow become the memories that we cherish the most. And I think that's exactly why scheduling became very, very important to me. Because at one point in my life, I was lost. Not physically, but internally. And I feel like that's the strangest kind of lost one can ever go through. Because nobody really notices. You can still laugh. You can still post online. You can still show up. You can still sit in classrooms. You can still joke around with your friends, but deep down you feel very disconnected from your own life. At that point of time, I didn't really know where I was going. I didn't have structure. I didn't have direction. And most importantly, I did not feel intentional. And I think that's something a lot of us young people experience today. We're constantly moving at a very fast pace, but we rarely slow down to ask ourselves an important question. Why am I moving this way in the first place? At that point of time where I was lost, I started noticing a few things about people. People who lived differently, people with discipline, people with routines, people with goals, people who lived like their future and their life and their goals actually mattered. And honestly, at first, I admired them from a distance. Stay right there. Because when you feel lost, intentional people almost look unreal. Surreal completely. But slowly, through mentors, through brothers, through friends, through people I respected, through observing people how they lived differently, I personally started changing. And what's funny is, the thing that changed my life is nothing complicated at all. One day, I took a paper and a pen, and I wrote down what I had to do for the day. That's it. No life-changing podcast, definitely not an Ashton Hall morning routine, no productivity course, just a simple list. And that tiny little habit changed the way I lived. Because for the very first time in a while, my life stopped feeling blurry. I could actually see my time. I could see what mattered to me. I could see what distracted me. I could see how much time I was losing unintentionally, and little by little, I stopped reacting to life and I started designing it. And that's when I realized something very, very, very important. Scheduling is not about becoming robotic, but rather, it's not about becoming robotic. It is not about controlling every single minute of your life. It is definitely not becoming one of those productivity influencers who wakes up at 4 a.m., drinks lemon water, right beside a mountain, taking a journal. No, that's not productivity. Scheduling for me became freedom, because once I started becoming intentional with my time, I suddenly had more life. More life for medical school, more life for leadership, for projects, for the gym, for my family, for my faith, for my friends to go out. Time to rest. And even after years of practicing how to schedule and, designing the most perfect routine that I could, I'm still not perfect at it. I still procrastinate. I still feel very, very overwhelmed. And I have the most chaotic days possible. But the only difference between back then and now is that my chaos has direction. And that changed everything. As a medical student, I started wondering why something so small as writing down what you have to do for the day could have such a powerful effect. And turns out there's actual science behind it. I'm going to bore you guys with a little science lesson now. One of the things that we learn about is something called the working memory, right? So your working memory is basically your brain's tiny little desk, your brain's mental desk. It's the space where you're holding information temporarily while trying to solve problems, to think, to make decisions, or even learn something new. But the only problem is this desk is entirely small. So when we overload that desk, your focus suffers, your decision-making suffers, your learning suffers. And because of that, we feel very overwhelmed. Psychologists call this cognitive load. In simple terms, cognitive load is the amount of mental effort being used by our working memory at any given moment. But what's even more fascinating is that our cognitive load can be divided into three parts. We have our intrinsic cognitive load. This is the type of load that comes naturally from the difficulty of a task. Let's take an example. Learning math. Who here takes math? Show of hands, right? Math can be hard. Integration, differentiation, subtraction, addition, whatever. But it is hard because it is naturally complex, not because you're doing something wrong. It is just simply complex. That's because in life, some challenges that we face are naturally demanding. That right there is intrinsic load. The second one is extragenous cognitive load. And this is exactly where many of us struggle. Extragenous load is simply the mental effort that we waste on things that don't actually require our attention, such as trying to remember 10 different deadlines, switching between 5 apps, couple of notifications, a cluttered workspace, wondering what you're supposed to be doing next. All of these things consume your mental energy without creating meaningful purposes. And then finally, there's a third type, the extragenous cognitive load, which is the good type. This is the type of mental effort that we put in that helps us build understanding, develop skills, and create meaningful learning. This is the effort we want more of. So, the goal is not to completely remove your cognitive load, because that is simply impossible. But it is to reduce the unnecessary load so that more of our mental energy can be put towards the things that matter more. And that is exactly what scheduling did for me. When I started writing things down on my list, I wasn't becoming smarter overnight or getting more disciplined than anyone around me, like in a span of 2 seconds. No. I was just simply reducing my extrinsic cognitive load. So at that point, my brain stopped acting like a storage unit, but rather a tool. And that is exactly why, ladies and gentlemen, scheduling works. Not because it turns you into a productivity machine, but rather it creates clarity, and it allows your mind to spend less time managing chaos and more time creating progress. But the only problem that we face is that goals are often wishes disguised as plans. I'll let this sink in. Goals are often wishes disguised as plans. Your schedule, or a schedule, is where wishes become decisions. Because the moment you decide when something will happen, it starts to feel real. It becomes real. That's when I realized that scheduling was not about filling every empty space on my calendar, but rather it was about answering 4 questions. What am I building? That's my purpose. Who am I building it with? That's my people. What is carrying me through it? That's my body. And what keeps me grounded? My values, my faith. And if I'm being very, very honest with you guys, the pillar that I underestimated the most was people. For a long, long, long time, I thought scheduling was about getting more work done, getting better grades, leading more projects, being more productive. But I realized some of the most meaningful moments in my life did not come from completing a task. It came from people, through family dinners, long conversations with friends, random beach trips, coffee that somehow turns into a 3-hour discussion. The people who celebrate your wins, the people who remind you who you are when life becomes overwhelming, the people who make the journey worth taking in the first place. That is exactly why I started scheduling people too. Because at the end of the day, very few of us are going to look back and wish that we had answered one more email. And many of us are going to wish that we had spent more time with the people we love. Every single week, whether we realize it or not, we are dedicating our schedule to these 4 pillars. But the real question is, are we doing it intentionally or subconsciously? And that's exactly why today's theme becomes really, really important. Borrowed time. And I feel like that's the most accurate descriptions of life I've ever heard. Because none of us actually own our time. We borrow it. We borrow our youth, our energy, our opportunities, the moments with people we love. And the strangest thing about borrowed things is that you tend to protect it far more better than if it were yours. For example, if I lent you $1 billion right now, which I won't, I don't have that, you're definitely gonna protect it, right? But life offers us something far more valuable. 24 hours, a day, a chance. And we often spend it without thinking. And that realization changed the way how I schedule my life, because now scheduling is not about priority, but rather it's about alignment. Making sure the way I spend my time actually reflects the type of life I want to live in the future. Because your schedule tells the truth. If you say your dreams matter, your schedule will reveal whether that's true. If you say your health matters, your schedule will reveal whether that's true. If you say your relationships matter, your schedule will definitely reveal whether that's true. And maybe that's the real art of scheduling. Not becoming obsessed with work or trying to be as efficient as you can or trying to optimize yourself into complete exhaustion, but learning how to intentionally make space for things that make life more meaningful. So, I'm not standing here before you guys here today as someone who has life completely figured out. I still do get lost on a very, very frequent basis. But the only difference is that I move with intention now. And that's what maybe growth really is. Not becoming perfect, not chasing perfection, but rather becoming aware. So here's one thing I want you to remember today. Your future is not built by your biggest ambitions, but it is built by something that's repeatedly earning a place on your calendar. Because every single day, whether we realize it or not, we're making a trade. We trade hours for habits. We trade habits for lifestyles. And eventually, we trade the lifestyles for the lives we end up living. Since all of us are just borrowing our time, the question isn't about how much time you have left. The question really is, what are you doing with the time you have been given today? Your life becomes whatever repeatedly receives your time. Thank you.